Ma'am, you need to get on the ground now! Officer Brennan's knee pressed into Keisha Washington's back as morning joggers slowed their pace along Riverside Park's main trail. The concrete scraped against her cheek. 3 uniformed officers towered over her small frame while she lay face down in simple gray athletic wear and worn Nike sneakers. Her water bottle rolled toward the nearby oak trees. Forgotten. Anonymous tip. Suspicious black woman. Casing expensive homes. That's all it took. Keisha's breathing stayed controlled despite the weight on her spine. Her military-grade encrypted phone slid from her pocket onto the sidewalk. The officers paid it no attention, focused on restraining someone they saw as just another problem to solve. From a second-story window across the street, neighbor Sarah Chen held her smartphone steady, live streaming everything. The comment section exploded with reactions from both sides. But what happened next would expose this police department's darkest secrets forever. The 911 call had come in at 6:47 a.m. There's a black woman walking around the expensive houses on Elmwood Drive. She keeps looking at the properties like she's casing them. Officer Brennan arrived expecting trouble. When he spotted Keisha stretching against a mailbox after her 3-mile run, his assumptions crystallized. She didn't belong here. "Excuse me, ma'am, we need to talk." Keisha turned, earbuds still in. "Is everything okay, officer?" "That depends. What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Her eyebrows raised slightly. "Jogging? Same route I take every Tuesday morning for the past 8 months." Officer Rodriguez stepped out of the patrol car, hand resting on his belt. The body language shift was immediate. What started as a routine check had become an interrogation. "Save the attitude, lady," Brennan said, moving closer. "We know your type. You live around here?" "I don't understand why that matters." Keisha's voice remained level, but her military training kicked in. She assessed exits, witness positions, potential escalation points. "It matters because someone called about suspicious activity. You match the description." Sarah Chen had been watering plants on her balcony when she heard the raised voices. She grabbed her phone and started recording. The live stream went live on her neighborhood Facebook group. Police interaction happening on Elmwood. Within minutes, the viewer count climbed. Comments flooded in. Finally, someone's doing something about the crime. This is racial profiling, pure and simple. I've seen her running before. She minds her own business. Call the news stations. Below on the street, the encounter intensified. Keisha remained calm as Brennan circled her like prey. His partner maintained distance but kept one hand near his weapon. "I'm going to need to see some ID," Rodriguez called out. "Am I being detained?" Keisha asked. "Because if not, I'd like to continue my run." "Yeah, you're being detained. Suspicious activity in a high-crime area." The irony wasn't lost on her. Riverside Park had one of the lowest crime rates in the city. These officers knew it. She knew it. But facts didn't matter when assumptions took control. Keisha slowly reached for her wallet, movements deliberate and visible. Her encrypted phone remained on the ground where it had fallen, its black military-grade case unremarkable to the officers focused on asserting dominance. "Keisha Washington," Brennan read from her driver's license. "Says here you live on Maple Street. That's 15 minutes away. Long way to come for a jog." "The park has better trails." "Or better targets," Rodriguez muttered. Sarah's livestream viewer count hit 500. The comments section had become a battlefield of racial tensions and police accountability debates. Some viewers recognized the intersection. Others called for backup footage from different angles. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." "For what charge?" "Trespassing. Suspicious activity. We'll figure it out at the station." The metal handcuffs felt cold against Keisha's wrists. She didn't resist, didn't give them any reason to escalate further. But her mind cataloged every violation of protocol, every constitutional breach, every piece of evidence that would matter later. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Morning joggers slowed their pace. Dog walkers crossed to the opposite sidewalk, some filming with their phones, others hurrying away from the confrontation. Sergeant Murphy's cruiser pulled up, adding a third uniformed presence to the scene. He stepped out with the swagger of someone who'd handled situations like this before. "What do we have here?" Murphy asked, surveying the scene. "Suspicious person call. Subject was uncooperative," Brennan explained. Keisha said nothing. Her silence unnerved the officers more than argument would have. She stood perfectly still, hands cuffed behind her back, breathing controlled, eyes focused on something beyond their immediate understanding. "You got anything to say for yourself?" Murphy demanded. "I'm exercising my right to remain silent." "Smart mouth on this one," Rodriguez commented. Murphy walked a slow circle around Keisha, studying her like a specimen. Her athletic clothes were modest but quality. Her running shoes showed miles of wear, but weren't cheap. Something didn't fit the profile they'd constructed. "You work around here?" Murphy asked. "Yes." "Doing what?" "Government work." The officers exchanged glances. In their experience, government work usually meant clerks, custodians, or low-level administrative roles. Nothing that would change their assessment of the situation. Sarah's live stream had reached 800 viewers. Someone in the comments had identified the location and was calling local news stations. The story was beginning to take on a life of its own, spreading beyond the immediate neighborhood into broader social networks. "All right, let's take her in," Murphy decided. "Let downtown sort this out." As they guided Keisha toward the patrol car, her encrypted phone buzzed on the sidewalk. The screen lit up briefly, showing an incoming call from a contact listed only as General Hayes, urgent. None of the officers noticed. The phone went dark, the call unanswered. But somewhere in a Pentagon office, a red flag had just been raised in a system designed to track the whereabouts and welfare of specific high-clearance personnel. Keisha settled into the back of the patrol car without complaint. Through the window, she could see Sarah still filming from her balcony. Other phones captured different angles. The digital record was building piece by piece. What the officers saw was a successful arrest of a suspicious person. What they'd actually done was trigger a sequence of events that would expose years of systematic problems in their department. The patrol car pulled away from Riverside Park, leaving behind a crowd of witnesses and a growing online audience that would soon reach far beyond their small city. The police station's booking area hummed with routine activity. Keisha sat in the holding chair, still in handcuffs, while Officer Brennan processed paperwork. Her encrypted phone had been collected as evidence, sealed in a clear plastic bag with her other belongings. What the officers didn't know was that her phone's emergency protocol had automatically activated after the missed call from General Hayes. Every 30 minutes without user authentication, it sent location pings to Pentagon security. Captain Morris arrived within an hour, coffee in hand and irritation on his face. Tuesday mornings weren't supposed to include media attention, but Sarah's live stream had been shared 1,200 times across social platforms. "What's the situation?" Morris asked Murphy. "Suspicious person call turned into an arrest. Subject was uncooperative, possibly casing houses in Riverside district." Morris looked through the one-way glass at Keisha. She sat perfectly straight, eyes closed, breathing in measured counts, not the posture of someone scared or guilty. "Any priors?" "Clean record. Works for the government, she says." "Doing what?" "Claims she wouldn't say. Typical bureaucrat attitude." Outside the station, things were escalating beyond their control. Sarah's video had caught the attention of @Riverside Watch, a local activist account with 15,000 followers. They'd reshared the footage with commentary about racial profiling patterns in the area. Local news producer Janet Torres received the tip at 9:23 a.m. By 10:15, Channel 7's mobile unit was setting up across from the police station. The story was gaining traction faster than anyone anticipated. Inside, Keisha finally spoke. "I need to make a phone call." "You'll get your phone call when we're ready," Brennan replied without looking up from his paperwork. I'm not asking for a favor. I'm invoking my constitutional right. Murphy stepped closer to the holding area. This isn't a movie, sweetheart. You'll make your call when the process is complete. The dismissive tone was calculated to provoke a reaction. Instead, Keisha simply nodded and returned to her controlled breathing. The lack of emotional response frustrated the officers more than anger would have. By 11 a.m., the story had crossed into mainstream social media. Riverside profiling began trending locally. The original video now had 3,000 shares and climbing. Comments ranged from supportive to hostile, revealing deep community divisions. Maybe they should arrest more of these people, one comment read. I've seen her running for months. She's harmless, replied another. Since when is jogging while black a crime? If you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. Captain Morris felt the pressure building. The mayor's office had already called twice asking for updates. The last thing they needed was another viral police controversy. Let's wrap this up, Morris told his officers. Book her for trespassing and suspicious activity. Get her processed and released. But when they ran Keisha's information through the federal database, something unexpected happened. Her profile triggered a security flag that required additional verification. Not a criminal flag, something else entirely. That's weird, Rodriguez said, staring at his computer screen. It's asking for enhanced clearance verification. What does that mean? Murphy asked. No idea. I've never seen this before. The system displayed a message. Subject requires federal verification protocol. Contact appropriate authorities before proceeding. Morris frowned. Probably just a glitch. Government employees sometimes have weird database entries. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, Keisha's missed check-in had escalated through proper channels. Colonel Patricia Hayes, Deputy Director of Intelligence Operations, was reviewing the automatic security alerts from her desk overlooking the Potomac. Keisha Washington, Senior Intelligence Analyst, Middle East Operations Division. Current assignment, Domestic Law Enforcement Oversight and Federal Grant Compliance Review. The irony was not lost on Colonel Hayes. The person responsible for investigating police departments for federal compliance violations had just been arrested by one of those departments. Hayes picked up her secure phone and dialed the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Back at the station, Keisha remained silent as the officers grew increasingly agitated. The media presence outside was growing. 3 news vans now lined the street, along with a small crowd of protesters and counter-protesters. She's got some kind of federal flag on her record, Rodriguez reported to Morris. What kind of flag? Won't say. Just that we need special clearance to proceed. Morris felt his stomach tighten. Federal complications meant paperwork, oversight, and potential departmental review. All things that made his job harder. Just process her normally. If the feds want to get involved, they can call us. At 12:30 p.m., Keisha's phone rang in the evidence locker. The caller ID showed DOD Security, Urgent. It rang 15 times before going to voicemail. The automated message was brief. This is Colonel Hayes with the Department of Defense. I need immediate contact with Agent Washington regarding Operation Clearwater. This is a Priority 1 communication. The message was recorded on the station's evidence system, but no one listened to it. Outside, the crowd had grown to about 50 people. Some held signs supporting police. Others demanded justice. The divide ran along predictable lines, but the energy was building towards something larger. Channel 7 reporter Marcus Webb went live at 1 p.m. We're here at Riverside Police Station where a controversial arrest this morning has sparked community debate about policing practices in affluent neighborhoods. Social media amplified every angle. Someone had identified Keisha through public records, revealing her government employment but not her specific role. The narrative began forming. Hard-working civil servant targeted for jogging while black. Inside the station, pressure mounted from multiple directions. The mayor's office wanted answers. The media wanted statements. Social media wanted justice. Captain Morris made a decision that would haunt him. Let's move forward with booking. Federal flag or no federal flag? Are you sure, Captain? Murphy asked. This feels bigger than a simple trespassing case. She's in our custody for a legitimate arrest. We follow our procedures. What Morris didn't know was that Keisha's division had been investigating his department for 8 months. Federal grant compliance reviews had revealed concerning patterns in arrest statistics, use of force reports, and community complaint data. Her arrest wasn't just ironic. It was evidence. At 1:45 p.m., Keisha was formally charged with criminal trespassing and failure to comply with police orders. The booking process included fingerprints, photographs, and a property inventory. When they processed her belongings, the desk sergeant noted, "One encrypted cellular device, military specification." "Military?" Morris asked. "Says so right on the evidence tag." For the first time since the arrest began, Captain Morris felt genuinely worried. Military equipment suggested more than a low-level government job. Outside, the crowd had reached about 75 people. Local politicians began arriving, drawn by the media attention and community response. City Council member Elena Rodriguez held an impromptu press conference calling for transparency in the investigation. The story was evolving beyond a simple arrest. It was becoming a flashpoint for broader conversations about justice, accountability, and community trust. Inside her holding cell, Keisha opened her eyes and checked the wall clock, 2:00 p.m. Her emergency protocols would escalate again in 30 minutes if she remained out of contact. She had been patient, professional, compliant. But patience had its limits, and those limits were about to be tested. The next phase of this encounter would reveal just how badly these officers had miscalculated their target. At 2:30 p.m., everything changed. Keisha's encrypted phone activated its final emergency protocol. The device had been designed for intelligence operatives working in hostile environments. After 4 hours without user authentication, it transmitted a priority alert to Pentagon Security Operations Center. The message was simple: agent compromised, immediate extraction required. Colonel Patricia Hayes was in a budget meeting when her aide interrupted with a red folder marked Priority 1. "Ma'am, we have an Agent Washington situation." Hayes opened the folder and her expression darkened. Senior intelligence analyst Keisha Washington, currently assigned to domestic law enforcement oversight, had been arrested by the very police department she was investigating. "Get me the FBI Civil Rights Division," Hayes ordered, "and activate the legal team." At Riverside Police Station, Captain Morris was fielding his 7th call from the mayor's office when his desk phone rang with an unfamiliar tone. "Captain Morris, this is Agent Jennifer Torres with the FBI Civil Rights Division. We need to discuss one of your detainees." Morris felt his blood pressure spike. "Which detainee?" "Keisha Washington. She was arrested this morning." "That's an ongoing investigation. I can't discuss details." "Captain, I'm going to be very clear. You're holding a federal agent who was conducting an authorized investigation of your department. Release her immediately." The words hit Morris like a physical blow. "Federal agent? Senior intelligence analyst with the Department of Defense. She's been investigating your department for federal grant compliance violations for the past 8 months. Morris looked through his office window at the holding area where Keisha sat in her cell. The same calm posture, the same controlled breathing. Suddenly it looked less like resignation and more like patience. "That's impossible. She's just some jogger who was acting suspicious." "Captain Morris, in approximately 10 minutes, you're going to receive a call from the Pentagon demanding her immediate release. I strongly suggest you begin that process now." The line went dead. Morris stared at the phone, then at the evidence bag containing Keisha's belongings. Military-grade encrypted device. Federal database flags. Enhanced clearance requirements. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. At 2:45 p.m., Morris's phone rang again. The caller ID showed Department of Defense. This is Colonel Patricia Hayes, Deputy Director of Intelligence Operations. You are currently holding one of my senior analysts without proper authorization. Morris's mouth went dry. Colonel, we had a suspicious person call. Captain Morris, Agent Washington was conducting a federal investigation into your department's compliance with civil rights requirements for federal grant eligibility. Your department receives $12.3 million annually in federal law enforcement grants. The number hit Morris like a sledgehammer. $12.3 million, nearly a quarter of their total budget. I wasn't aware of any investigation, Morris stammered. That was the point. Agent Washington was investigating patterns of discriminatory policing that could violate federal grant requirements under Section 14141 of the Violent Crime Control Act. Morris knew that statute. Violation meant automatic suspension of federal funding. Without federal grants, they'd have to lay off 89 officers. The department would collapse. What? What do you need from us? Immediate release, full documentation of the arrest process, and a complete briefing on why your officers detained a federal agent for jogging in her assigned surveillance area. In the holding cell, Keisha finally stood and walked to the bars. She looked directly at the security camera and spoke clearly. This is Senior Intelligence Analyst Keisha Washington, Defense Intelligence Agency, Security Clearance Level TS-SCI. I am requesting immediate contact with my commanding officer and legal counsel. The desk sergeant nearly dropped his coffee. Did she just say Defense Intelligence Agency? Murphy, who had been reviewing the arrest report, looked up with growing horror. What's DIA? Military intelligence, the sergeant whispered. Those are the people who know where the bodies are buried. By 3:00 p.m., the station had erupted into controlled chaos. Morris was making frantic calls to the mayor, the city attorney, and anyone else who might help contain the situation. Outside, the media presence had doubled. Word was spreading that the arrested woman was more than a simple jogger. Social media buzzed with speculation about federal involvement and cover-ups. Inside, Officer Brennan faced the reality of what he'd done. He'd arrested a federal agent, on camera, while she was conducting an official investigation of his department. How much trouble are we in? Rodriguez asked. Career-ending trouble, Murphy replied, staring at the federal statute requirements on his computer screen. At 3:15 p.m., Keisha was escorted from her cell to an interview room. No longer handcuffed, she sat across from Captain Morris, who looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past hour. Agent Washington, Morris began carefully, I need to understand what happened this morning. Keisha placed her hands flat on the table. Captain Morris, I've been conducting surveillance and data collection in Riverside District for 8 months. This morning's incident was recorded by multiple witnesses and documented through federal monitoring systems. Federal monitoring systems? Your department is under active investigation for civil rights violations related to federal grant compliance. This morning's arrest provides direct evidence of the discriminatory patterns we've been documenting. Morris felt the walls closing in. What kind of patterns? Keisha opened a file folder that had materialized from somewhere. Inside were charts, graphs, and statistical analyses that made Morris's stomach turn. In the past 18 months, your officers have conducted 347 suspicious person stops in affluent neighborhoods. Of those, 78% involved people of color. Conviction rate, 3.2%. That's 271 unconstitutional stops. The numbers were devastating. Morris knew they were accurate because he'd seen similar patterns in internal reports he'd chosen to ignore. Your department's current violation rate is 34% above federal tolerance thresholds for bias-based policing, Keisha continued. That triggers automatic grant suspension under federal law. What does that mean for us? Loss of federal funding, potential Justice Department oversight, possible federal takeover of department operations. Morris's career flashed before his eyes. 23 years of service, a pension, a reputation in the community, all threatened by one morning's arrest. Agent Washington, what would it take to... resolve this situation? Keisha leaned back in her chair. That depends on your department's willingness to implement meaningful reform. What kind of reform? Complete overhaul of training protocols, federal oversight of hiring practices, community accountability measures, and full cooperation with ongoing civil rights investigations. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Morris realized he was no longer dealing with a simple arrest. This was a federal case with national implications. If we cooperate, what happens to my officers? That depends on how they respond to reform requirements. Officer Brennan's actions this morning were recorded and will be reviewed by federal prosecutors. Morris looked through the one-way glass at Brennan, who was pacing nervously in the break room. The officer who'd started this mess was facing potential federal civil rights charges. I need to make some calls, Morris said quietly. Captain, Keisha said as he stood to leave, you should know that everything that happened today was recorded not just by civilian witnesses, but by federal surveillance systems. The Pentagon has been monitoring your department's activities in real time. Morris stopped cold. Monitoring how? That's classified. But I can tell you that constitutional violations by federally funded law enforcement agencies receive very close attention from very high levels of government. As Morris left the room, Keisha remained seated at the table. Her calm demeanor hadn't changed since the morning arrest. But now it was clear that her patience hadn't been resignation. It had been professionalism. She was gathering evidence, building a case, documenting every constitutional violation for federal review. And the officers who'd arrested her had just provided her with all the evidence she needed to justify a complete federal takeover of their department. The real revelation wasn't that she was a federal agent. It was that this morning's arrest had been the final piece of an investigation that would reshape policing in their city forever. Outside, news vans continued to multiply. Social media posts about federal involvement were spreading nationwide. The story was becoming bigger than anyone had imagined. Inside the police station, careers were ending and a new chapter in accountability was beginning. The woman they'd arrested for jogging while black was about to change everything. The emergency meeting convened at 4:30 p.m. in the city council chambers. Mayor Patricia Hendricks sat at the head of a long conference table, flanked by City Attorney David Park and Police Commissioner James Crawford. Captain Morris occupied the hot seat at the far end, looking like he was facing a firing squad. On the large wall monitor, Colonel Patricia Hayes appeared via secure video link from the Pentagon. Her uniform displayed ribbons that suggested someone not to be trifled with. Let me be clear about the situation, Colonel Hayes began, her voice cutting through the room's tension. Agent Washington was conducting an authorized federal investigation when your officers detained her. This investigation has been ongoing for 8 months under Operation Clearwater. Mayor Hendricks felt her political career flash before her eyes. Colonel, we had no knowledge of any federal investigation. That was intentional. Agent Washington was gathering evidence on discriminatory policing patterns that violate federal civil rights statutes. Her arrest this morning provides direct evidence of those patterns. City Attorney Park leaned forward. What specific violations are we talking about? Keisha, now present in the room wearing her professional attire instead of jogging clothes, opened a thick binder. The transformation was striking. Gone was the vulnerable woman from the morning arrest. In her place sat a federal investigator with 8 months of damning evidence. Section 14141 of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act prohibits discriminatory law enforcement practices, Keisha explained. Your department's current violation rate exceeds federal tolerance by 34 percentage points. She displayed a PowerPoint slide showing arrest statistics broken down by race and neighborhood. The numbers told a devastating story. In Riverside District alone, your officers conducted 127 suspicious person stops in the past 6 months. 89% involved people of color. Conviction rate, 2.4%. That indicates systematic harassment rather than legitimate law enforcement. Commissioner Crawford tried to deflect. Those are just statistics. They don't prove intentional discrimination. Keisha clicked to the next slide. Audio recordings from patrol car communications suggest otherwise. The room fell silent as she played a compilation of radio chatter from various arrests. Got another one of those types on Elmwood Street. Probably doesn't belong in this neighborhood anyway. These people always claim they live here. Mayor Hendricks closed her eyes. The recordings were devastating evidence of cultural bias within the department. How much federal funding are we talking about? She asked quietly. Colonel Hayes consulted her notes. Your department receives $12.3 million annually in federal law enforcement grants. Additionally, the city receives $18.7 million in community development funds that require civil rights compliance. The total hit the room like a bomb. $31 million in federal funding was at stake. Loss of federal grants would require elimination of 89 police positions, Keisha continued. Your emergency services budget would be reduced by 43%. Community programs would lose $8.2 million in annual funding. City Attorney Park did quick calculations. That would bankrupt the city's public safety operations. Which is why we're offering an alternative, Colonel Hayes said from the monitor. The room perked up. An alternative meant negotiation was possible. Federal oversight and mandatory reform, Hayes continued. Complete departmental restructuring under Justice Department supervision. Implementation of bias training protocols developed by the Pentagon's Civil Rights Division. Mayor Hendricks looked around the table. Her city was being offered a choice between financial collapse and federal takeover. What would oversight involve? She asked. Keisha flipped to a detailed reform proposal. 24/7 federal monitoring of all patrol activities. Mandatory bias training for all personnel. Community Oversight Board with federal reporting requirements. Complete revision of hiring and promotion standards. Commissioner Crawford objected. That would gut our operational independence. Commissioner, Colonel Hayes said sharply, your operational independence produced this morning's constitutional violation. Agent Washington was arrested for jogging while black in a neighborhood she was authorized to monitor. The blunt assessment silenced Crawford's protests. We need specific commitments, Keisha continued. Officer Brennan must face federal civil rights charges. Sergeant Murphy requires mandatory retraining and probationary status. Captain Morris needs suspension pending investigation. Morris looked stricken. His career was being dismantled in real time. What about the other officers? Mayor Hendricks asked. Depends on their cooperation with reform implementation. We have documented evidence of bias-based policing spanning 3 years. Some violations may be criminal, others administrative. City Attorney Park studied the federal statutes. If we refuse the oversight agreement? Complete loss of federal funding within 30 days, Hayes replied. Justice Department lawsuit for systematic civil rights violations. Potential federal receivership of police operations. The room absorbed the implications. Federal receivership meant losing local control entirely. How long would oversight last? Hendricks asked. Minimum 5 years, Keisha answered. Progress reviews every 6 months. Full compliance with bias reduction targets required for early termination. Crawford made one last attempt at resistance. This is federal overreach. We can appeal these findings. Colonel Hayes' expression hardened. Commissioner, Agent Washington's arrest was recorded by multiple witnesses and federal surveillance systems. Your officers detained a federal agent conducting authorized civil rights investigations. Appeals won't change those facts. The reality settled over the room like a shroud. They had no leverage. The evidence was overwhelming, the legal exposure catastrophic, and the financial consequences devastating. Mayor Hendricks looked at her city attorney, who nodded grimly. The legal advice was clear: accept oversight or face complete financial collapse. What do you need from us? Hendricks asked quietly. Keisha outlined the immediate requirements. Public acknowledgement of constitutional violations. Formal apology to affected community members. Implementation of federal monitoring systems within 72 hours. Beginning of mandatory training programs within 1 week. And Officer Brennan? Crawford asked about his subordinate. Federal prosecutors will review his case. Cooperation with reform efforts may influence charging decisions. The meeting stretched past 6 p.m. as details were negotiated. Media trucks lined the street outside City Hall. Social media buzzed with speculation about federal involvement and departmental changes. Inside, the power dynamics had completely reversed. The morning's arrest of a suspicious jogger had become an afternoon's negotiation over federal control of local policing. One final question, Mayor Hendricks said. How did we not know about this investigation? Keisha's answer was precise. Agent Washington maintained deep cover for 8 months. She established residence in the surveillance area, developed a consistent jogging routine, and gathered evidence through direct observation. You mean she was watching us the whole time? Every unconstitutional stop, every biased radio communication, every violation of civil rights protocols, all documented and forwarded to federal prosecutors. The scope of the investigation stunned the local officials. They thought they were dealing with one morning's mistake. Instead, they were facing 8 months of documented evidence showing systematic constitutional violations. By 7 p.m., the agreement was signed. Riverside Police Department would submit to complete federal oversight in exchange for maintaining federal funding and avoiding criminal prosecution for most officers. Captain Morris would face suspension and investigation. Officer Brennan would face federal charges. The department would implement the most comprehensive reform program in the state's history. As the meeting ended, Mayor Hendricks approached Keisha privately. Agent Washington, was this morning's arrest planned? Keisha's response was carefully measured. I've jogged that route every Tuesday for 8 months. This morning's events were a natural consequence of the discriminatory patterns your department has displayed consistently during that time. The answer was both yes and no. She hadn't planned to be arrested, but she'd documented enough evidence to know it was likely. When it happened, she was prepared. The corporate showdown was over. Federal authority had prevailed through evidence, legal leverage, and financial pressure. The real question was whether local officials would embrace reform or simply comply with minimal effort. That would determine whether this story ended with genuine change or cosmetic adjustments designed to maintain the status quo. 3 months later, the transformation was undeniable. Officer Brennan stood trial in federal court for civil rights violations under Title 18, Section 242. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict. He received 18 months in federal prison and permanent disqualification from law enforcement. Sergeant Murphy completed 160 hours of bias training and accepted demotion to patrol officer. His radio communications were monitored for 1 year as part of his probationary agreement. Captain Morris took early retirement rather than face internal investigation. His pension remained intact, but his career ended in disgrace. The real changes ran deeper than individual consequences. Riverside Police Department installed federal monitoring systems in every patrol car. Dashboard cameras recorded all interactions. Audio systems captured radio communications. GPS tracking documented response patterns to identify potential bias in patrol deployment. The data was sobering. Before federal oversight, response times in affluent neighborhoods averaged 4.2 minutes. In working-class areas, 11.7 minutes. The disparity violated equal protection principles and federal grant requirements. Under new protocols, response time disparities could not exceed 15%. Supervisors received real-time alerts when bias patterns emerged. Officers whose statistics showed discrimination faced mandatory retraining. Community oversight became reality rather than rhetoric. The Federal Compliance Board included 5 community members, 2 federal observers, and 3 police representatives. They reviewed all complaints, monitored departmental statistics, and published monthly transparency reports. The psychological screening program eliminated 23% of new hire applicants who showed bias indicators. Remaining candidates completed 80 hours of civil rights training before field assignment. Current officers underwent comprehensive retraining. The curriculum, developed by Pentagon civil rights specialists, focused on unconscious bias recognition, constitutional policing, and community engagement. Resistance was minimal. Officers understood the alternative was unemployment. The results spoke louder than any mandate. Complaint rates dropped 67% in the first quarter. Use of force incidents declined 54%. Community satisfaction surveys showed the highest approval ratings in department history. But the most significant change was cultural. Officer Rodriguez, who had participated in Keisha's arrest, became one of the program's strongest advocates. "I didn't realize how my assumptions affected my policing," he admitted during a community forum. "The training opened my eyes to biases I didn't know I had." The department's demographic makeup shifted. New hiring priorities emphasized community policing experience over military backgrounds. Promotional requirements included bias training completion and community engagement metrics. Keisha continued her work, though her cover was blown. She transitioned to an oversight role, monitoring the department's compliance with federal agreements. Her presence served as a constant reminder that federal authority was watching. The financial impact proved the skeptics wrong. Rather than bankrupting the city, federal compliance actually increased available funding. The Justice Department awarded Riverside an additional $2.3 million in community policing grants for successful reform implementation. Other cities began requesting similar oversight programs. The Riverside model became a template for police reform nationwide. Federal officials used it as proof that accountability and effectiveness could coexist. The changes extended beyond policing. City Council implemented bias training for all municipal employees. Hiring practices were revised to promote diversity. Community engagement became a performance metric for department heads. Local businesses noticed the improvement. Property values in diverse neighborhoods increased as residents felt safer reporting crimes and cooperating with investigations. Tourism revenue grew as the city's reputation for fair treatment spread. The media narrative shifted from crisis to success story. National outlets featured Riverside as an example of effective police reform. Mayor Hendricks, initially resistant to federal oversight, became its public advocate. "We thought federal involvement would weaken our police force," she said during a press conference. "Instead, it made us stronger, fairer, and more effective." The psychological impact on the community was profound. Residents who had avoided police contact began participating in community policing programs. Crime reporting increased 31% as trust between police and community grew. Children in diverse neighborhoods stopped fearing police encounters. Parents no longer gave their teenagers lectures about surviving traffic stops. The culture of fear was replaced by expectation of fair treatment. Keisha's morning jog route became symbolic. Every Tuesday, she ran the same path where she'd been arrested. Now, officers waved respectfully as she passed. Community members joined her run, creating informal conversations about safety and justice. The encrypted phone that had triggered federal response became evidence in a dozen similar cases nationwide. Other federal agents used the Riverside precedent to justify investigations in departments with comparable bias patterns. 6 months after the arrest, Keisha received the Federal Service Award for Distinguished Intelligence Work. The ceremony took place in the same park where she'd been detained. Agent Washington's courage under pressure and commitment to constitutional principles exemplify the highest ideals of federal service, Colonel Hayes said during the presentation. But Keisha's greatest satisfaction came from the data. Discriminatory stops in Riverside District dropped 89%. Constitutional violations fell to 0. The community she'd monitored for 8 months was finally receiving equal protection under law. Reform had succeeded where resistance would have failed. Intellectual victory had proven more powerful than confrontation. 1 year later, Keisha Washington jogged past the oak tree where her water bottle had rolled during that Tuesday morning arrest. The same route, the same time. But everything else had changed. Officer Martinez, one of the new hires trained under federal protocols, nodded respectfully as she passed. No suspicion, no harassment, just professional acknowledgement between a federal agent and a local officer who understood constitutional boundaries. The Riverside model had spread to 47 cities nationwide. Federal oversight programs based on Keisha's investigation were active in departments from Seattle to Miami. The Pentagon's Civil Rights Division received requests weekly from mayors seeking proactive reform rather than reactive crisis management. These black stories, these life stories, these touching stories that emerge from systematic injustice often end in tragedy. But this real-life story proved different. It demonstrated that preparation, professionalism, and persistence could triumph over prejudice. Sarah Chen still lived in the same apartment overlooking Elmwood Street, but her morning routine no longer included filming police encounters. The discriminatory stops had ended. The live stream that started everything had been viewed 2.7 million times, becoming a case study in citizen journalism and community accountability. The encrypted phone that triggered federal response now sat in a Pentagon display case representing technological tools for civil rights protection. Keisha carried a standard device these days, her cover blown, but her mission accomplished. Local businesses in Riverside District reported increased foot traffic from diverse communities. Property values had stabilized after years of decline due to over-policing. The economic benefits of constitutional policing proved that justice and prosperity could coexist. Children played in parks where their parents had once feared police contact. Teenagers walked home from school without anxiety about traffic stops. The culture of fear had been replaced by expectation of fair treatment. But Keisha's greatest pride came from the officers themselves. Many who initially resisted reform had become its strongest advocates. They discovered that constitutional policing was more effective than bias-based harassment. Crime clearance rates improved when communities trusted police enough to cooperate with investigations. The data told the story. Discriminatory stops down 89%, constitutional violations at 0, community satisfaction at historic highs. Federal grant compliance had become a source of departmental pride rather than bureaucratic burden. 3 police academies now taught the Riverside model as standard curriculum. New officers learned constitutional policing from day one rather than unlearning biased practices later. The culture was changing from the ground up. Keisha's intelligence work continued, monitoring departments across the country for civil rights compliance. But her most important contribution might have been proving that systematic change was possible without destroying effective law enforcement. Real power, she learned, wasn't about position or authority. It was about competence, preparation, and the strategic application of evidence to create lasting reform. The morning jog that started as routine exercise had become a catalyst for national police reform. Sometimes the most powerful responses were the most measured ones. Have you witnessed injustice that needs exposing? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might spark the next wave of systematic change. Hit that subscribe button for more real-life stories of quiet courage transforming broken systems. And share this video, because accountability works best when communities stay engaged. Real change happens when preparation meets opportunity, and when those with power choose to use it responsibly.